In court, my aunt showed an invoice for raising me after my mom died. Food, clothes, shelter, adding up to $50,000. The judge looked it over carefully, then asked, "And where's the $190,000 in Social Security benefits you collected?" The whole courtroom burst out. You know those moments in life when everything you thought you knew, everything you believed shatters into a million pieces? Imagine sitting in a courtroom, listening as your own aunt, the woman who took you in after your mother died, presents an itemized bill for raising you, $50,000, only for the judge to calmly ask, "Where's the $190,000 in Social Security benefits you collected?" The entire room just erupted. My name is Althea, and I'm 26. I just graduated nursing school, ready to chase big dreams. But 13 years earlier, when I was only 13, my world fell apart. My mom died, and I moved in with my Aunt Sophie, who never missed an opportunity to remind me I was a financial burden. Fast forward to my college graduation, and the envelope I got wasn't a congratulatory card. It was that detailed, shocking $50,000 invoice. And now I was actually sitting in court watching my aunt sue me for my own childhood. Before all that, my life with Mom was filled with warmth and so much love. Dad passed away when I was just 3, so it was always just us. Money was tight in our tiny 2-bedroom apartment, but Mom, Amanda, made sure I never, ever felt like we were struggling. She was a nurse at Memorial Hospital, working long shifts, coming home with incredible stories about saving lives. Those stories, they planted the seed for my own dream. Weekends were our sacred time. Saturday mornings, the smell of vanilla and chocolate would fill our kitchen as we baked cookies. Sundays were for the park, feeding ducks, or browsing books at the library. Mom always said, "Althea, education is the one thing nobody can take from you." Our apartment walls were a gallery of my artwork and school certificates. She kept every single one, displaying them like precious museum pieces. When I brought home good grades, she'd stick them on the fridge with fruit-shaped magnets, and we'd dance around the kitchen in pure celebration. For my 10th birthday, she surprised me with a children's medical kit. I carried that thing everywhere, taking my stuffed animals' temperatures, listening to Mom's heartbeat with the plastic stethoscope. "You'll be wearing a real one someday," she'd say, her eyes crinkling with pride. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Mom worked extra shifts during holidays to make sure my Christmases and birthdays were special. She taught me to appreciate what we had. Gratitude makes any life rich. She'd remind me when I'd occasionally complain about not having the latest toys or fancy clothes like some of my classmates. Everything changed the summer I turned 12. Mom started coming home from work more than just tired. She was exhausted. At first, she blamed extra shifts. But then she started losing weight rapidly, developed a persistent cough. I'd catch her wincing in pain, popping painkillers when she thought I wasn't looking. I knew something was terribly wrong. The day she finally went to the doctor, I waited at our neighbor Mrs. Thomas's apartment, trying to focus on a science project, but my mind was racing. When Mom returned, her face told me everything before she said a word. Stage 4 lung cancer. Terminal, 6 months to a year. Those words crashed into our happy little world like a wrecking ball. Mom tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, but our roles slowly reversed. I started making dinner, doing laundry, helping her to bed when she was too weak to walk. I kept a notebook of her medication schedule, becoming fiercely protective of her diminishing energy. School became secondary as I transformed into my mother's caretaker. My 12-year-old shoulders carried the weight of groceries, household chores, and the creeping dread of what was coming. Friends stopped calling because I couldn't go out anymore, but I didn't care. Every moment with Mom became precious, measured, finite. The hospice nurse started visiting daily when Mom could no longer get out of bed. I'd sit beside her, reading her favorite books, or just holding her increasingly frail hand. "You're so strong, Althea," she'd whisper. "Promise me you'll keep going. Keep shining after I'm gone." On a quiet Tuesday morning, just 3 weeks after my 13th birthday, Mom took her last breath while I held her hand. The hospice nurse found me still sitting there an hour later, unable to let go. The world had never felt so empty, so vast, so terrifying. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and pitying looks. I stood numb as people I barely recognized hugged me and murmured platitudes about my mother being in a better place. What place, I wondered, could be better than here with me? That's when Aunt Sophie appeared. My mother's younger sister had always been distant, visiting only on rare holidays with expensive gifts and limited conversation. Now she stood beside me at the funeral, her hand on my shoulder, telling everyone how she'd take care of her poor orphaned niece. The social worker met with Sophie and my elderly grandmother, who lived in a senior community and couldn't take me in. It was decided. I would move in with Sophie, her husband Jack, and their daughter Cassidy. Sophie appeared so caring in front of the social workers, promising to give me a loving home. As I packed up my childhood into boxes, I found a letter Mom had written me, tucked into my favorite book. Remember who you are, Althea. Life will throw storms your way, but you have the strength to weather them all. I'll love you always, even when you can't see me anymore. I folded that letter into my pocket, took one last look at our apartment, and stepped into my new life, completely unaware of the challenges that awaited me. The drive to Aunt Sophie's house took nearly 3 hours. Each mile increased the hollow feeling in my chest as I watched my hometown disappear in the side mirror of Sophie's luxury SUV. She didn't say much, just occasionally commented on how different my life would be now, how much better things would be in their neighborhood. Sophie and Uncle Jack lived in an impressive 2-story colonial house with pristine white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. My cousin Cassidy, 15 and impossibly poised, greeted us with a rehearsed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Uncle Jack, a tall man with a perpetual expression of mild disinterest, briefly welcomed me before retreating to his home office. "This will be your room," Sophie said, opening the door to a space at the end of the hallway, far from the other bedrooms. The walls were stark white. The furniture was basic, clearly secondhand, a stark contrast to the glimpses I'd caught of Cassidy's room with its pink walls and custom pieces. "We can add some color later." "Maybe," she added as an afterthought. That first night, Sophie prepared a special dinner. Everyone made polite conversation. Uncle Jack asked about my interests, and Sophie even shared a few memories of my mother. For a moment, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement would work out okay. But the shift came gradually. By the end of my first week, Sophie had presented me with house rules that didn't seem to apply to Cassidy. I had a strict curfew, limited bathroom time, designated study hours, and a list of chores that grew longer each day. "In this house, everyone contributes," Sophie explained, handing me a toilet brush. Meanwhile, Cassidy lounged by their backyard pool, her own chores mysteriously non-existent. My belongings, which had filled our apartment, now looked meager, scattered around the spare room. Sophie had gone through my boxes before I could even unpack, setting aside clothes she deemed too worn or inappropriate. When I asked about them, she said, "We have standards in this neighborhood, Althea. You represent our family now." School was another adjustment. My academic records transferred, but nothing else did. No friends, no history, no teachers who knew my capabilities. I was placed in standard classes despite having been in advanced programs at my previous school. When I mentioned this to Sophie, she dismissed my concerns. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You've been through a trauma. Best to take it easy." The first time I truly understood my place in the household came when school supplies were purchased. Cassidy received a new laptop, a designer backpack, and top-of-the-line everything. I was given a plastic binder, basic notebooks, and pens from the dollar store. "We have to be mindful of expenses," Sophie said when she saw my expression. "Your mother didn't leave much for your care." That night, I heard Sophie and Jack arguing through the thin walls. "The Social Security checks barely cover the extra expenses," Sophie's voice carried. "Do you know how much teenagers eat? How much their activities cost?" "She's family, Sophie," Jack replied, his voice tired, resigned. "Family that's costing us." Amanda always was irresponsible, not planning better for her daughter. I buried my face in my pillow, tears soaking through as I clutched my mother's letter. The money comments became a regular feature of life with Sophie. If I outgrew clothes, needed school supplies, or even if I ate what she deemed too much at dinner, I was reminded of the financial burden I represented. "Do you know how much braces cost?" she muttered when the dentist recommended them. We left without scheduling the orthodontic work. "College applications are $70 each," she complained when I brought home information about universities with nursing programs. "Maybe community college would be more appropriate for your situation." The contrast between my treatment and Cassidy's grew more pronounced. Cassidy received a car for her 16th birthday. I was told I could get a job to save for my own transportation. Cassidy's room was redecorated seasonally. My bedspread had been the same faded blue since arrival. Cassidy attended dance classes, lacrosse practice, and SAT prep courses. I was told such extras weren't in the budget for me. Uncle Jack witnessed it all with passive acceptance. Occasionally, he'd slip me $20 or offer to drive me somewhere when Sophie refused, but he never directly challenged her treatment of me. "Your aunt is under a lot of pressure," he'd say, as though that explained everything. Throughout it all, the memory of my mother's warmth became both comfort and torture. I'd close my eyes at night and try to remember the sound of her laugh, the feeling of her hand brushing hair from my face. Those memories sustained me through Sophie's coldness, through Cassidy's casual cruelty, through the growing awareness that I wasn't wanted in this house. I began spending more time at the school library, volunteering for any activity that kept me away from Sophie's critical gaze. I joined study groups, helped teachers after class, and discovered that academic success could be a form of escape. If I couldn't have love, I could at least have achievement. One evening, while cleaning the kitchen, as required by my chore list, I accidentally knocked over Sophie's purse. As I gathered the spilled contents, I found a letter from the Social Security Administration addressed to Sophie as my guardian. It referenced monthly survivor benefits being deposited for my care. The amount was substantial, far more than Sophie had implied she received. That night, I carefully replaced my mother's photo on my nightstand, the one Sophie had suggested I put away to help with the grieving process. I looked into my mother's smiling eyes and made a silent promise. I would endure. I would succeed. And someday I would escape. High school brought new challenges, but also unexpected opportunities. Despite Sophie's dismissal of my academic potential, I fought to be placed in honors classes and quickly proved I belonged there. My science teachers particularly noticed my aptitude, and by sophomore year, I had joined the Health Sciences Club, the first step toward my dream of following in my mother's footsteps. "Another club meeting?" Sophie would ask with thinly veiled irritation. "I suppose you'll need money for that, too." I never asked for money anymore. Instead, I'd secured a part-time job at Sweet Blossom's Bakery 3 afternoons a week and all day Saturday. The owner, Mrs. Garcia, became a bright spot in my life, slipping me extra pastries at closing time and adjusting my schedule during exam periods. My first paycheck felt like freedom in my hands until Sophie cornered me in the kitchen. "Now that you're earning an income, you'll need to contribute to household expenses," she announced, hand extended. $300 monthly seems fair for room and board." The amount represented nearly half my earnings, but I handed it over without argument. Fighting Sophie only made things worse, as I'd learned through painful experience. Later that night, I overheard Sophie telling Uncle Jack how she was teaching Althea financial responsibility by collecting rent. Cassidy, now a senior and self-appointed queen of the school, made sure everyone knew I was her charity case cousin. She spread stories about my mother's death, embellishing details for maximum pity, or sometimes mockery, depending on her audience. When boys showed interest in me, she warned them about my unstable family background and probable emotional issues. One rainy Tuesday during junior year, I stayed late to make up a chemistry lab. Walking to the bus stop, I realized I'd missed the last one. As I resigned myself to a 3-mile walk in the downpour, a car pulled alongside me. Mrs. Jackson, my AP biology teacher, rolled down her window. "Althea, get in before you drown." During the drive home, Mrs. Jackson asked questions about my interest in medicine, my study habits, my plans after high school. When she pulled up to Sophie's house, she hesitated before saying, "You know, you remind me of myself at your age, determined, focused, despite obstacles." Something in her tone made me look up sharply. Mrs. Jackson smiled gently. "My door is always open if you need to talk about anything." 2 weeks later, after Sophie had confiscated half my paycheck for utilities I'd used excessively, I found myself in Mrs. Jackson's classroom during lunch. The words poured out of me, the financial manipulation, the emotional neglect, the Social Security letter I'd found. Mrs. Jackson listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Have you considered that your aunt may be misusing funds meant for your care?" she finally asked. The thought had occurred to me, but hearing it from an adult gave it legitimacy. "What can I do? I'm a minor. She's my guardian." Mrs. Jackson's reply changed everything. "Start documenting. Keep records. And let's look into scholarship options that could get you out of there after graduation." With Mrs. Jackson's guidance, I began researching nursing scholarships obsessively. I joined every club that might strengthen my applications, volunteered at the local hospital on Sundays, and maintained perfect grades despite working nearly 20 hours weekly. One evening, while searching for a stapler, I discovered a folder labeled with my name. Inside were years of Social Security statements showing monthly deposits of over $1,000 for my care. Nearly $60,000 had been paid to Sophie since my mother's death. Yet I wore secondhand clothes, lacked basic school supplies, and was made to feel guilty for every morsel of food I consumed. I photographed the documents with trembling hands, then carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. That night, I emailed the photos to Mrs. Jackson and to myself at my school email address, creating evidence I hoped I'd never need to use. Senior year arrived with university applications and the quiet, burning determination to escape Sophie's house forever. Mrs. Jackson helped me apply for every scholarship available, editing my essays during lunch periods and after school. When acceptance letters began arriving, Sophie intercepted them, presenting each with comments about the burden of student loans and unrealistic expectations. The breakthrough came in April, a full-ride nursing scholarship to State University, including housing, meals, and a stipend for books. When the thick envelope arrived, I raced to check the mail before Sophie could. I hid the letter under my mattress until I could fully read its contents. That night, I called Mrs. Jackson with the news, my voice barely containing my excitement. "I got it! I'm free!" My high school graduation ceremony should have been a celebration. Instead, Sophie complained about the cost of my cap and gown, the waste of ordering announcements, and the impracticality of the nursing program I'd chosen. Cassidy, home from her first year at an expensive private college, fully funded by her parents, rolled her eyes throughout Sophie's monologue. I scanned the audience during the ceremony, disappointed but not surprised to find the section where Sophie and Jack should have been sitting empty. As I accepted my diploma, I heard a distinct cheer from the back. There stood Mrs. Jackson alongside Mrs. Garcia from the bakery, both clapping wildly. After the ceremony, Mrs. Jackson handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a professional stethoscope, just like my mother had used. The card read simply, "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." I know I am. For the first time since my mother died, I felt seen, valued, and championed. Walking back to Sophie's house that day, the diploma in my hand and the stethoscope in my bag, I knew I was just weeks away from a new beginning. The day I moved into my college dormitory felt like breathing fresh air after years underwater. State University was only 40 minutes from Sophie's house, but it might as well have been another planet. My residence hall room was small, with institutional furniture and cinder block walls, yet it represented something priceless: independence. My roommate Jasmine arrived with her parents, who helped her unpack boxes and hang fairy lights around her side of the room. They offered to help with my things too, but my entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Sophie had dropped me off at the campus entrance, not even bothering to park. "Text when you're settled," she'd said, already putting the car in drive. "And remember, your scholarship doesn't cover holiday breaks. We'll need to discuss compensation if you plan to stay with us during those times." Jasmine and I became fast friends despite our different backgrounds. She came from a loving family who called her daily, sent care packages, and genuinely wanted to know about her classes. When she realized I never received such calls or packages, she began sharing hers without comment. "My mom always sends too much anyway," she'd say, dividing cookies or toiletries between us. University life demanded intense focus. The nursing program was rigorous, with early morning clinicals, late-night study sessions, and endless practical exams. I thrived under the pressure, remembering my mother's dedication to her patients. To cover expenses not included in my scholarship, I worked at the campus coffee shop. And took weekend shifts at a nearby assisted living facility. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to think about Sophie, which was exactly how I wanted it. The less contact, the better. Still, holiday breaks loomed on the calendar like dark clouds. Before Thanksgiving break my freshman year, Sophie called with expectations for my visit. "Since you're not contributing financially anymore, we'll need compensation for your stay." $300 for the week seems fair. Food isn't free, Althea. I swallowed hard, calculating how many extra shifts I'd need to afford going home for the holiday. Jasmine, overhearing my end of the conversation, waited until I hung up before saying, "Come home with me instead. My parents would love to have you." That Thanksgiving became the first of many holidays spent with Jasmine's family. The Parkers welcomed me without question, including me in family photos and traditions as though I'd always been there. Mrs. Parker, learning about my nursing studies, shared stories from her own career as a physical therapist. Mr. Parker taught me to make his famous cranberry sauce, standing beside me in the kitchen with patient instructions. When Sophie called on Christmas to ask when I'd be arriving with my room and board payment, I informed her I had made other arrangements. Her surprised pause was followed by concern, not for my well-being, but for the lost income. Spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. I was accepted into an accelerated program that would allow me to complete my degree in 3 years instead of 4. The workload increased dramatically, but so did my determination. During a campus career fair, I met David, a medical student volunteering at the healthcare booth. Tall, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence, he struck up a conversation about my interest in pediatric nursing. Before long, we were meeting for coffee between classes, talking for hours about healthcare, ethics, patient advocacy, and our personal journeys to medicine. "My dad's a surgeon," David explained during one of our coffee dates. He expected me to follow exactly in his footsteps, but I'm interested in family practice in underserved communities. We've been at odds about it for years. His understanding of family pressure created a bond between us that deepened with each conversation. When I finally shared the full story of Sophie's treatment, he listened without judgment, then asked the question that had been hovering in my mind for years. "Have you considered that what she did might be illegal? Social Security benefits for surviving children are meant to provide for the child, not supplement the guardian's income." During spring break of my sophomore year, instead of accepting another invitation from Jasmine's family, I stayed on campus to research. The nearly empty library became my second home as I dug through legal websites and forums for similar situations. What I discovered left me stunned. Guardians misappropriating survivor benefits could face serious legal consequences, including fraud charges. I made an appointment with the university's legal aid office, bringing copies of the Social Security statements I'd photographed from Uncle Jack's office. The student attorney who reviewed my case looked increasingly serious as I explained the situation. "This isn't just unethical," he said finally. "It's potentially criminal. Your aunt had a fiduciary responsibility to use those funds for your direct benefit." "What are my options?" I asked, heart pounding. "You could file a complaint, possibly pursue recovery of funds, but that would mean legal action against your aunt." He studied my face. "It's a big step. Think about it carefully." I left the office with resources and information, but no clear decision. That night, I called Mrs. Jackson, who had remained a trusted mentor throughout my college years. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she advised. "Focus on your education. Document everything. The statute of limitations gives you time." Junior year brought clinical rotations that cemented my passion for nursing. Working with actual patients, particularly children, reminded me daily why I'd chosen this path. My professors praised my combination of technical skill and compassion, attributes I'd learned watching my mother work. David and I grew closer, supporting each other through exams and late-night study sessions. When he invited me to meet his parents over summer break, I accepted with only slight trepidation. Unlike Sophie, Dr. and Mrs. Hoffman welcomed me warmly, asking thoughtful questions about my studies and goals. "Althea has the highest GPA in the nursing program," David announced proudly over dinner. Dr. Hoffman raised his glass in a toast. "To excellence and compassion in healthcare. The world needs more providers like you two." The contrast between David's family and my experience with Sophie couldn't have been starker. That night, lying in the comfortable guest room of the Hoffmans' home, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the full extent of Sophie's betrayal. It wasn't just about money. It was about denying me the love and support a child deserves after losing their only parent. As graduation approached, job offers began coming in, thanks to my academic record and glowing recommendations from clinical supervisors. I accepted a position at Children's Memorial Hospital in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, with a starting salary that would finally provide true financial stability. 2 weeks before graduation, David proposed during a picnic at the campus lake where we'd had our first real date. The vintage sapphire ring had belonged to his grandmother, he explained, given to him with her blessing after she'd met me during family dinner. "You don't have to answer right away," he said, reading my shocked expression. "I know we're both starting our careers and timing is complicated." I kissed him, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, absolutely yes." Life was finally taking shape according to my own design, not Sophie's restrictions or limitations. As I prepared for graduation, for my new job, for a future with David, I believed the chapter with Sophie was closed. I was wrong. My graduation day dawned bright and clear, a perfect May morning that felt symbolic of my new beginning. Jasmine and I helped each other into our caps and gowns, taking dozens of photos in our dorm room one last time. The Parkers arrived early, bringing flowers and hugs. David and his parents came bearing a gift bag containing a beautiful new lab coat with Althea Marshall, RN, embroidered on the pocket. As we gathered outside the auditorium, I spotted an unexpected trio approaching. Sophie, Uncle Jack, and Cassidy, all dressed in what I recognized as their public appearance outfits. Sophie's smile was wide, but didn't reach her eyes. "We wouldn't miss our Althea's big day," she announced, loudly enough for nearby families to hear, placing possessive emphasis on our. She air-kissed my cheeks while whispering, "We need to talk after the ceremony." Throughout the graduation, I could feel Sophie's gaze on me. When my name was called, I heard her voice rise above others. "That's my niece. I raised her after her mother died." The ceremony concluded with mortarboards flying into the air and tears of joy all around. As graduates dispersed to find their families, Sophie intercepted me before I could reach the Parkers and Hoffmans. "We brought you a graduation gift," she said, pressing a thick envelope into my hands. "Open it now." Inside was not a card, but what appeared to be an invoice, meticulously itemized on Sophie's personal stationery. The heading read, "Expenses incurred in raising Althea Marshall, 2012 to 2017. The list was extensive and detailed. Room and board, 60 months at $500 month, $30,000, clothing, and personal items, $4,850 for school. Supplies and activities, $3,275 medical and dental expenses, $5,200 transportation, and miscellaneous, $6,775. The total at the bottom, circled in red pen, $50,000. What is this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the celebratory noise around us. "A reality check," Sophie replied, her smile never wavering for the benefit of onlookers. "Now that you're officially an adult with a career, it's time to repay what you owe. We made many sacrifices to provide for you after your mother's irresponsibility left you with nothing." Uncle Jack looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Cassidy smirked slightly. "I don't owe you anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The government sent you money every month specifically for my care." Sophie's smile tightened, barely enough to cover basics. "This bill reflects additional expenses. We expect monthly payments, beginning with your first nursing paycheck." Before I could respond, David appeared at my side, sensing tension. "Everything okay here?" I introduced him briefly, watching Sophie's expression shift as she noted his confident posture and the expensive watch that marked him as coming from money. "Just a family matter," Sophie said smoothly. "Althea understands her obligations." That evening, surrounded by the Parkers, Hoffmans, and friends from the nursing program at a celebration dinner, I tried to push Sophie's invoice from my mind. David, sensing my distraction, squeezed my hand under the table. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together," he whispered. 3 days later, an official-looking letter arrived at my new apartment. A law firm representing Sophie Marshall was demanding payment of $50,000 for care and support provided to Althea Marshall during her minor years. It immediately connected me with his father. Dr. Hoffman listened carefully to my situation, then recommended a lawyer friend who specialized in family law. "Don't respond to anything yet," he advised. "Let's get professional guidance first." Marcus Wright's law office was modest but neat, with diplomas from prestigious schools lining the walls. After reviewing Sophie's invoice and the legal letter, he leaned back in his chair with a puzzled expression. "This is unusual," he admitted. "Guardians typically don't sue former wards for basic care expenses, especially when they've received government benefits for that purpose." He studied me thoughtfully. "There's something more going on here. Tell me everything about your time with your aunt." For the next 2 hours, I detailed life with Sophie, the constant reminders of my cost, the different treatment compared to Cassidy, the discovery of Social Security statements, and Sophie's increasing demands for money once I began working. Marcus took extensive notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he closed his notebook decisively. "I'll take your case," he said, "and I don't think you'll owe your aunt a dime when we're done." The next weeks were a flurry of legal preparation. Marcus filed a counterclaim denying Sophie's right to reimbursement. He also submitted requests for financial records related to my mother's estate and any benefits received on my behalf. During this process, we uncovered surprising information. My mother had maintained a modest life insurance policy naming me as beneficiary. The funds should have been placed in trust for my benefit. Additionally, there was a small inheritance from my maternal grandparents that I'd never been informed about. Where did this money go? I asked Marcus during a meeting at his office. That's exactly what we need to find out, he replied, typing another note. Your aunt had legal obligations as your guardian to manage these assets in your best interest. 2 months after Sophie's initial demand, we received notice of a court date. The lawsuit was moving forward, with Sophie seeking the full $50,000 plus legal fees. Marcus seemed oddly pleased by this development. Now we'll have discovery, he explained. Legal power to demand financial records she might otherwise withhold. Through formal discovery requests, Marcus obtained bank statements, tax returns, and benefit records from Sophie's accounts during my time in her home. What they revealed was shocking. Not only had Sophie received monthly Social Security survivor benefits of over $1,000, but she had also collected the life insurance payout and inheritance money. The total amount that should have been used for my care or held in trust, nearly $190,000. She spent all of it, Marcus said grimly, reviewing the financial analysis. And now she's suing you for more. How is that possible? I asked, staring at the figures. How could she legally take all that money? She couldn't. That's the point. Marcus began organizing documents into a trial folder. Your aunt didn't just fail to provide adequately for you using funds specifically designated for that purpose. She potentially committed fraud. As our court date approached, I struggled to balance preparation for the case with starting my new job at Children's Memorial. David provided unwavering support, accompanying me to meetings with Marcus and helping research similar cases. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. Memories of my mother flooded back, her gentle hands checking my temperature when I was sick, her proud smile at school events, her whispered encouragements when tasks seemed too difficult. What would she think of all this? In the darkness of my bedroom, I whispered to her memory, I'm trying to be strong. Mom, I hope you'd be proud of who I've become despite everything. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy dress and low heels. My mother's small pearl earrings, my only jewelry. David drove me to the courthouse where Marcus waited on the steps with a confident smile. Ready? He asked. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. Ready? The county courthouse was an imposing brick building with marble columns and high ceilings that amplified every footstep. David and Jasmine flanked me as we walked through security, their presence providing silent strength. Marcus led us to a polished wooden bench outside courtroom C, where we waited for our case to be called. Across the corridor, Sophie, Uncle Jack, and Cassidy sat with their attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit who kept checking his gold watch. Sophie had dressed for the occasion in a conservative cream suit that screamed, "Respectable citizen." When our eyes briefly met, she gave me a small, confident smile that sent chills down my spine. All these years, I whispered to David. She made me feel like I was taking food from her table, wearing clothes she could barely afford to provide. And all that time? Don't focus on her, Marcus advised, overhearing. Today is about facts, not feelings. Let the evidence speak. At 9:30, the bailiff called our case. Marshall versus Marshall. Judge Harriet Woodson presiding. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with only a few spectators scattered among the benches. Judge Woodson, an African-American woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, nodded briskly as we took our places. I've reviewed the filings in this case, she began. Mrs. Sophie Marshall is suing her niece Althea Marshall for reimbursement of child-rearing expenses in the amount of $50,000 plus legal fees. Miss Althea Marshall has filed a counterclaim. Let's proceed with opening statements. Sophie's attorney, Mr. Daniels, approached the bench first. His voice was smooth as butter as he painted Sophie as a selfless relative who stepped in after tragedy, sacrificing financially to provide a stable home for her orphan niece. Your Honor, my client opened her home and her heart when her sister tragically passed away, leaving a 13-year-old daughter with no resources and no provisions for her care. For 5 years, the Marshalls provided food, shelter, clothing, educational support, and emotional stability during a difficult time. He gestured dramatically toward Sophie, who had adopted an expression of saintly patience. They did this without complaint, Your Honor, despite the significant financial burden it placed on their household. Now that Miss Althea Marshall has secured lucrative employment as a registered nurse, My client simply asks for reasonable compensation for these extraordinary expenses. Marcus took notes throughout, his expression neutral. When his turn came, he approached the bench with calm confidence. Your Honor, this case isn't about compensation for childcare expenses. It's about accountability for funds that were specifically designated for Althea Marshall's care following her mother's death. Funds that were substantial and more than adequate to provide for her needs without additional contribution from the defendant. Judge Woodson leaned forward slightly. You're referring to survivor benefits? Yes, Your Honor, and more. We have documentation showing Mrs. Sophie Marshall received Social Security survivor benefits, life insurance proceeds, and inheritance funds totaling nearly $190,000 that should have been used exclusively for Althea's care or held in trust for her future. A small murmur ran through the courtroom. Sophie's composed facade cracked slightly as she whispered urgently to her attorney. That's a serious allegation, Counselor, Judge Woodson noted. I'll need to see that documentation. Let's proceed with testimony. Sophie took the stand first, describing how she'd rescued me from potential foster care after my mother's death. She detailed the sacrifices her family made, Cassidy sharing her home with a cousin she barely knew, family vacations curtailed due to the expense of another child, the emotional labor of helping a grieving teenager adjust. Mr. Daniels dramatically presented Sophie's itemized invoice, walking through each category of expense. Sophie nodded earnestly as he highlighted particularly costly items, braces I'd needed but never received, sports equipment for activities I'd never participated in, special tutoring I'd never been offered. And did the Social Security benefits you received cover these expenses? Mr. Daniels asked. Sophie shook her head solemnly. Not even close. The monthly benefit barely covered her food. Everything else came from our pocket. When Marcus rose for cross-examination, his approach was methodical. He established Sophie as my legal guardian, responsible for managing any assets or benefits for my welfare. Then he began introducing exhibits, bank statements showing regular deposits from Social Security, documents regarding my mother's life insurance policy, and records of my grandparents' inheritance. Mrs. Marshall, can you explain why you're claiming financial hardship when records show you received over $3,000 monthly designated specifically for Althea's care? Sophie shifted uncomfortably. That's not accurate. The Social Security was much less. Marcus presented another document. This statement from the Social Security Administration confirms monthly payments of $1,235 paid to you as Althea's guardian. Additionally, you received a lump sum life insurance payment of $65,000 and inheritance funds of $15,000, both legally required to be used for Althea's benefit. Where did these funds go? Sophie's composure crumbled further. There were many expenses. Household costs increased substantially. We had to move to a larger home to accommodate her. Mrs. Marshall, Marcus continued, during the 5 years Althea lived with you, these funds totaled approximately $190,000. Yet you provided her with secondhand clothes, denied her orthodontic care, made her work to pay for her own basic needs, and now claim she owes you an additional $50,000. Can you explain this discrepancy? Sophie's attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Woodson allowed most of Marcus's questions, her expression growing increasingly concerned as Sophie's answers became more evasive. When it was my turn to testify, I focused on facts rather than emotions, the different treatment compared to Cassidy, being required to pay rent from my part-time job earnings, the lack of support for educational expenses, and the discovery of benefit statements in Uncle Jack's office. Mr. Daniels's cross-examination attempted to paint me as ungrateful and entitled. Wasn't it generous of the Marshalls to take you in rather than sending you to foster care? Don't you think you owe them something for the roof over your head for 5 years? Before I could answer, Judge Woodson interrupted. Counsel, the question of whether a minor child owes a legal guardian for basic necessities is inappropriate. The guardian voluntarily accepted legal responsibility along with the benefits provided for the child's care. The judge called a brief recess after testimony concluded. When court resumed, she had reviewed all the financial documentation provided by both sides. I've seen enough, Judge Woodson announced, removing her reading glasses. Mrs. Marshall, would you please approach the bench? Sophie rose shakily, her earlier confidence evaporated. Mrs. Marshall, as Althea's legal guardian, You had a fiduciary duty to use all funds designated for her care, either to provide for her immediate needs or to preserve them for her future. The evidence presented today suggests you did neither. The judge shuffled through the documents before continuing, her voice stern. You received approximately $190,000 meant for Althea's benefit. Based on your own testimony and the evidence presented, it appears these funds were commingled with your personal accounts and used primarily for your family's expenses, not Althea's. Sophie attempted to interrupt, but Judge Woodson held up her hand. I'm not finished. Not only did you apparently misappropriate these funds, but you've now had the audacity to sue your niece for additional money, claiming expenses that should have been more than covered by the benefits you received. She turned to address the entire courtroom, her voice ringing with authority. I am dismissing Mrs. Marshall's claim with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential misuse of Social Security benefits and breach of fiduciary duty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. David squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. Judge Woodson continued. Miss Althea Marshall, you have the right to pursue civil recovery of misappropriated funds if you wish. My clerk will provide information on that process should you decide to proceed. With a final bang of her gavel, it was over. Sophie stood frozen by the bench, her face ashen. Uncle Jack stared at the floor while Cassidy frantically texted on her phone. As we exited the courtroom, Marcus smiled broadly. Congratulations. That couldn't have gone better. What happens now? I asked, still processing the judge's words. That's up to you, Marcus replied. You could pursue recovery of the funds, but that would mean another legal battle. Or you can consider this closed and move forward with your life. David put his arm around my shoulders. Whatever you decide, you're not alone. Looking back at Sophie being consoled by her attorney, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what might have been, the family support I'd been denied, the love that should have followed my mother's death. But I also felt something else, freedom. Freedom from the guilt and obligations Sophie had burdened me with for years. Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright sunlight, I made my decision. I don't want their money. I just want to close this chapter and start my own life. Marcus nodded understandingly. Sometimes the victory that matters most isn't financial. It's the truth being recognized. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the bottom. Mrs. Jackson, my high school biology teacher and mentor, had come to support me. Her presence was the final validation I needed, a reminder that true family isn't always defined by blood. The days following the trial brought a strange mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering sadness, and a new sense of freedom. David drove me home from the courthouse in thoughtful silence, occasionally squeezing my hand when words seemed inadequate. Jasmine and the Parkers had organized a small gathering at my apartment, their way of showing support without explicitly celebrating what had been, at its core, a family tragedy. As friends shared food and quiet conversation, I slipped onto my small balcony for a moment alone. The setting sun cast long shadows across the city, a visual reminder that one chapter was ending while another began. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. This isn't over. Family doesn't treat family this way. I stared at the message, recognizing the bitter irony in her words. Family doesn't treat family the way she had treated me, as a financial transaction, a burden, an obligation rather than a person to love. For the first time, I deleted her message without feeling guilt or obligation to respond. David joined me on the balcony, wrapping his jacket around my shoulders against the evening chill. You okay? I think I will be, I answered. Honestly, it's just a lot to process. The following morning, I began my first official shift at Children's Memorial Hospital. Walking through those doors wearing scrubs and my mother's pearl earrings felt like fulfilling a promise made long ago. The pediatric intensive care unit was challenging but rewarding, each small patient reminding me why I'd fought so hard to reach this point. My supervisor, Nurse Karen, took me under her wing, patiently guiding me through protocols and introducing me to the unique emotional demands of pediatric nursing. You have a natural way with the children, she observed during my first week. Some nurses take years to develop that kind of connection. I didn't tell her about my own childhood losses. Not yet. Those wounds were still healing, the scars still tender to touch. Instead, I channeled my experiences into empathy for my patients and their families, recognizing the fear in parents' eyes and the courage in children facing pain beyond their understanding. 2 weeks after the trial, Uncle Jack called. His voice sounded tired, defeated. "Althea, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted you to know I had no idea about the extent of what Sophie was doing. The Social Security, yes, but not the life insurance or inheritance." "You still let her treat me like a burden," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "You watched it happen every day for 5 years and did nothing." His heavy sigh carried through the phone. "You're right. My passivity makes me complicit. I should have protected you and I failed. I'm sorry, though I know that's inadequate." After a long pause, he added, "Sophie and I are separating. The trial was a wake-up call about who she really is, who I've allowed myself to become by standing by. I just wanted you to know." I felt no satisfaction in their marriage's collapse, only a complicated sadness for the family that might have been mine but never truly was. "I hope you find peace, Uncle Jack. I really do." That conversation marked the last direct contact with Sophie's household. Through mutual connections, I learned the district attorney had decided not to pursue criminal charges, but had required Sophie to complete financial management courses and community service. Cassidy occasionally sent hostile messages on social media, which I eventually solved by blocking her accounts. As summer turned to fall, I established routines in my new life. Challenging but fulfilling shifts at the hospital. Quiet evenings with David planning our future. Weekend brunches with Jasmine and friends from nursing school. The apartment slowly transformed from a sterile space to a true home, filled with plants, photographs, and small treasures that represented my emerging identity. One September afternoon, I received an unexpected email from the hospital's Human Resources Department. A trust fund had been established in my mother's name to provide scholarships for nursing students from single-parent households. The anonymous donor had requested I serve on the committee. The attached documentation revealed the trust had been funded with exactly $50,000. Uncle Jack. That evening, I called Mrs. Jackson to share the news. After all these years, she remained my trusted advisor in life's complicated moments. "It sounds like his way of making amends," she observed, "not erasing the past, but trying to create something positive from it." "Should I accept the committee position?" I asked. Part of me wants nothing to do with anything connected to that family. "Consider this," she replied thoughtfully. "The committee position isn't about them. It's about honoring your mother and helping students who share your experience. Don't let Sophie take that opportunity from you, too." Her wisdom had always cut through my confusion. The following day, I accepted the position, my first small step toward transforming pain into purpose. As my first year of professional nursing progressed, I found myself increasingly drawn to working with children from difficult home situations. Their resilience reminded me of my own journey. Their small victories became personal triumphs I celebrated alongside them. The hospital's social worker noticed my connection with these patients and invited me to join a support program for children in foster care or kinship guardianship. Sometimes the best healing comes from helping others through similar struggles.